So, wherever you are, so I say today, but this evening's talk for where we are in York and Aberdeen, respectively, and whatever time of day it is where you are, is about can we create a better technological future? My name's Siobhan. I work at the University of York in the digital skills team, and I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves. Steph, do you want to go first?
Yeah, my name's Steph. I do the same thing that Siobhan does.
Hi, and I'm Susan. I work at the University of Aberdeen and I work in library services there.
So yeah, we all have an interest in digital technologies and information about them, what people do. And so that is our plan for today. We're going to sort of take you through some thoughts around our technological past, present, and future. So on that note, I'll hand over to Steph.
Cheers, Siobhan. Yeah, so look, I'm using technology now. I've decided to go like full on and give you like two angles of me, two slightly different angles because technology is amazing, isn't it? I can do this, and I dread to think how my computer is coping with it, but I can still give it a go. And I think, we could trace the history of this back many, many years, but I suppose a reasonable starting point is around about 1947 when one of these things came into being. Not quite looking like this, but a little black box on three legs, a transistor, which kind of ushered in the world of electronics. Now, as technology develops, so does our ability to use that technology and that the opportunities that that technology presents. There's a kind of principle in electronics and in digital technology more generally called Moore's Law, which is named after a CEO of Intel, and it says that every 2 years the number of transistors that you can squeeze onto a microchip, a little thing like what I've got here, which will never be in focus if I do that, but I can pretend. The number of these that you can fit on one of these doubles every 2 years. In other words, the technology that we have around us, the computing power that takes up a certain amount of space, yeah, gets just means the space that it's taking up gets smaller and smaller and smaller. We can have better and better computers in tinier and tinier and tinier spaces. And if we just get rid of me and bring on my friend from the 1980s here, from I think it was a Sony advert, you can get a sense of that change in scale that technology has had for us. No longer are we carrying around a phone and a video camera and a ghetto blaster and all sorts of recording media and calculators and all of that kind of stuff. We don't have to do that because it's all been miniaturized and it all lives in one of these little black boxes that we all seem to carry around in our pockets these days. And that's kind of amazing, really, isn't it? Kind of fantastic that degree of technological progress that we find ourselves in. Like the fact that I'm talking at you down this camera and the image from this is being captured digitally and the audio is being captured in the microphone that I've got and the computer that's in front of me is processing all of that and it's going from the computer, it's going through the air, through wireless to my router in the next room, and then it's getting into the phone lines and it's going wherever you are. And you might be next door, or you could be absolutely anywhere in the world. Because we now have, thanks to this technology and this electronic revolution, we have the ability to connect with each other globally. That technology is no longer just something that's domestic, it supersedes traditional boundaries, transcends them. We're all connected globally. We've got a world of ideas at our fingertips. Isn't it marvelous? And I mean, reducing everything to this little box, getting everything, getting all the world connected. You might even say that it's magic.
Oh, it's funny you should say that, Steph, because I think I would say it's magic. All this connectedness that we have, all this computing power that we have in these miniature devices, I don't think we can describe it as anything other than magic. All these things that we can do now are the thoughts of science fiction, maybe even only 5 years ago. Things like generative AI weren't there, and we wouldn't have necessarily assumed, as the everyday person on the street, that that was going to be a possibility to us. And up on the screen at the moment, I've got a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, who is a fiction writer, who said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think the technologies that you've described there are mobile devices, which have become everything in one compact place. I think it's difficult for us not to say that that isn't magical to us. We don't understand necessarily all those computer processes. I'm not from a computer science background, so therefore, why would I? But I use these things every day. So these magical technologies are entwined with our everyday lives, with basically everything that we do. Just think for a second in terms of at home, that magical genie we have in the corner. We may shout to her as Alexa, can you do this? Can you order my shopping for me? Can you set a timer for me? Can you tell me what the weather's going to be like? All these magical things I can just voice activate through my own personal digital assistant. If we talk about our phones again, as Steph showed with those multiple functions that they have, my phone is now a way that I can connect with the world. Well, a phone was always about ringing and connecting people, but it's also now a personal cinema that I've got there. It's a games console. It's a productivity tool. It's basically anything that I want to download and add to it. This is all fantastic. And now I mentioned generative AI. Now we've got access to large language models. I mean, this was one of the fastest adopted technologies that there's been, with us all using things like ChatGTP. Because what I can do now is I can ask ChatGTP to help me write that business case, help me write that project proposal at work. Or maybe I can ask it to write me a bedtime story. So, right through from that work to education to entertainment, I engage with these magical devices. I mean, there's something here as a librarian and a bit of a itch at the back of my mind from all the fairy tales and folklore that I've come across that says all magic comes at a price. But to be quite honest, the convenience that I've got here makes me think, well, you know what? If I'm getting offered that magical carpet ride, I'm not going to ask where the destination is. I'm hopping on and I'm singing a whole new world straight away.
Watch the technology do its thing. So, what I'm interested in then is we've got this magic, right? So where do we get it from? Like, how do we invent magic? That's what I'm kind of interested in here. We've talked about how technology might seem magical and how it might have seemed to have come from nowhere, but it doesn't. It comes from somewhere. And so what I'm interested in is where those sort of ideas come from. Where do we get the ideas for new technology? How do people come up with new technological things? How does the light bulb moment happen for technology? Where it often comes from is looking for problems that need to be solved. Where can we solve particular problems using technology? This is often the question that technology companies ask, or just anybody trying to think of ways of solving problems. They might think, is there something that we could do with this? And maybe could we invent some technology that could do it? So this is a very common way of trying to find a way to invent those magical devices of any kind. It is around that sort of thing. Now, we might think, well, where do you kind of start from with that? Where do you get these ideas from? Where do these things become useful? And I just wanted to use an example that I kind of can easily think of when I think of how technology might solve a problem. And that is GPS and map apps, things like Google Maps and Apple Maps and all the other sort of map applications that are out there. They are solving the problem that we don't always carry with us the relevant maps for the places we are in. In fact, I might argue that most of us spend most of our time not carrying any paper maps with us whatsoever. And to highlight this, when they first sort of brought out lots of smartphones and people started to get them, I went with some friends to try and go to an event, and we looked up where it was before we went. And when we were going to the event, we went on our way. We thought, okay, I think we know where it is. It was in London. We thought we knew where we were going. And we got to the building only to find there were two buildings with very similar names in the area of London we were in, and we'd gone to the wrong one. We hadn't bought a paper map with us. We hadn't thought we were going to get lost. But my friend, just the previous day, had got a new shiny smartphone, the first one of I think anyone we knew who had one. And on that, we could go on the map app and find the route to the correct location for this event, which was very exciting to us. We were incredibly late, but we still got there. And so we can start to see how easily this is about solving problems that people might have to make life easier, or at least to leave us no longer stranded in Camden. But we need to think a little bit more about this. It's very hard doing all this modern technology, isn't it? It's not always as magic as you think. We need to think about this a little bit more in terms of this problem solving. In his 2013 book, To Save Everything, Click Here, Yevgeny Morozov talks about this idea of technological solutionism, which is the idea that all problems can be solved with technology, no matter how complex the problem actually is. And Morozov is kind of arguing against this idea and why it's a problem, that people might see the future as something to be solved, just a series of problems we could solve with technological advances and inventions. But people argue about these concepts of technological solutionism and whether or not it is positive. So lots of technology companies take this kind of approach. They think that all problems could be solved with technology. Some people think that means it gives us hope that we might be able to solve all our problems with technology, and that might get rid of some of the problems we have in the present day. I'm sure you could think of many problems you might have from small scale to large, and you might be able to think, I hope technology one day can fix that problem, because that would make things easier. But there's also questions around whether this idea of technological solutionism and thinking that technology can be the solution to everything oversimplifies many problems, sometimes causing new problems along the way, or maybe just underestimating the simplicity of the fix of these things. And sometimes you're still not going to necessarily solve the problem that you might want. So this photo here on my slide is a picture of the book I'm talking about, surrounded by technology. I couldn't find this picture online. I didn't try to generate it with generative AI because I knew that it wouldn't get it right. It wouldn't know what this book looks like. So I did a photo shoot in the office because luckily our office is full of random bits of technology and I own the book. So I made this myself. So none of the sort of solutions out there, whether it was copyright-free images on the web or generative AI, could solve this problem. But actually a digital camera could, so I still use some technology to get around this issue. But you can sort of see here that sometimes our problems aren't as easily fixed. And what I really want to highlight then, just to conclude this bit, is that it's the technology companies that have this approach a lot of the time, this solutionism idea. Silicon Valley, which is how often people refer to a lot of the big technology companies, due to that being where most of their offices are, often sees society as a problem to be fixed with technology. And there's various implications of that, as Susan's going to look at now.
Yeah, so just picking up on Siobhan's point that they were talking about technology is going to solve problems, or maybe society being seen as a problem that tech companies can solve. So I want to go back to my fairy tale theme and really think about the idea of who's solving the problems, who's our white knight. And by white knight, I mean that person or thing who's here to help someone out of a difficult situation. That's what I'm taking as that definition of my white knight. A white knight usually represents that heroic warrior fighting against evil. And if we think about our tech giants in Silicon Valley, if we think about who they are, actually some of the narratives that they have professed to us really take on that solving the world problems, being our white knight. They're here to help us. So let's look at Google. They initially said about don't be evil, so making the right decisions for humanity. And they were all about organizing the world's knowledge. This is a positive thing. We have all this open information available to us, the internet, being able to access that in a meaningful way seems like a positive thing to me. Let's think then as well about OpenAI. I mentioned about ChatGPT and generative AI. they're all about AI for humanity. It's about ensuring that any deployment of artificial intelligence or general artificial intelligence, should they get to it, is for the benefit to all, and it avoids causing harm to humanity. And then we'll move on to Facebook. They were about connecting the world, or maybe moving fast and breaking things. But let's focus on that connecting the world and them as our white knight. So I'm going to pick up on the Facebook Free Basics program. So what the Free Basics program what happened was, there's positives of having access to the internet. Actually, it's something that's been debated by the UN and thinking about how the internet helps us enact our human rights. You know, it's that opportunity to make connections, to build knowledge, to be innovative. So what Facebook's Free Basics program aimed to do was to provide access to the internet. But what it did was it provided access to a limited selection of websites and services, obviously including Facebook, and this was without incurring a charge. So this was praised in some ways for connecting millions of people to the internet who didn't previously have that access. But there's a lot of criticism around this program due to there not being that net neutrality and digital inclusion, because it was a limited number of services that were available. And actually, the Global Voices, which is a non-profit which works in terms of open media and human rights, said about this that by not enabling people to have open internet access where they could actually learn, create, and build things, actually what Facebook resulted in doing was building this version of the web, which was very passive, which was very consumer focused and very westernized. So actually, in this situation, we ended up with something which was more digital colonialism. It wasn't that open and free access. It wasn't enabling you to connect in whatever way that you wanted to. You had this limited worldview. So with this, it's maybe our white knights initially started with some of these positive ideas, but maybe their motivations and some of that morality changed along the way. So I mentioned before about all magic comes at a price. Well, all technology comes at a price as well. You know, there's lots of data, there's lots of computing power that goes into providing these free platforms and services. So our tech white knights may start off with these principles and ideas, but actually, as they become part of big companies, as they start to become a public company, as they have shareholders, that motivation to deliver in terms of profits and growth and further innovation may bring into question and may not be solving some of the problems that they initially intended to do. And I think whenever we're thinking about solving problems, whether in technology or any space, we need to think who's represented in that space, who's in the room, who's making those decisions. Because if we're making a decision that hasn't included the people that you were trying to save, so that population that white knight came into, you know, if they just arrive, they have no conversation with you about what your version of events is, what the problem is to you, and what the challenges are, they're probably going to kill the dragon, but maybe the dragon didn't need killing. So I think it's thinking about who's making those decisions about what those problems are and what those solutions might be.
Yeah. So what are the problems? Let's think. Let's think. What problems do we want tech to solve? What do we want not to have to do, maybe, and what the technology can do for us? And I think we could possibly think about, well, the dirty, dangerous, and dull tasks in life. Maybe getting the technology to do that. Dangerous stuff like bomb disposal. We get bomb disposal robots to go out and dispose the bombs, and then that way, if they blow up, it blows up a robot, and that's less important. Or dirty and dull tasks like housework. You know, housework. That's a classic. You know, we've been told for years about how robots can do all the housework. BBC Tech Magazine show Tomorrow's World used to have VT segments, video segments like this, demonstrating a little robot doing the hoovering up and what have you. You know, imagining a future where we'd be free of all of that kind of domestic drudgery. Housewives, because it was always the housewives, emancipated by robot domestics, secretaries replaced by dictating and filing machines. I mean, there is a sort of tacit suggestion, I suppose, here that, maybe it's blue collar work and women's work that's the replaceable stuff here, and perhaps that is or should be a wage for someone, or maybe someone with a lot of money could be funding this stuff. But yeah, I suppose still, it's drudgery all the same, and maybe our lower paid workers, or the people who might be doing those jobs could be freed to do something more productive. Get the robot to do the dirty work. Get us humans to do something more interesting. And we're starting to see some of this. We're starting to see robots doing some of the chores in the house. It isn't just a kind of 1960s fantasy. We've got robot vacuum cleaners hoovering up after us, and occasionally they'll go wrong and they'll spread all the dog muck everywhere. But most of the time they're doing the hoovering up, and that's great. Our modern technology boasts so many more abilities now than merely the menial. Generative AI, let's go back to that idea. That's been sold to us as a creativity engine, an artist. And I suppose that's where we start to have to think about what questions that raises for us. I mean, here's a question. Well, it's a statement, but it's a statement that was doing the rounds on social media about a year ago. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. And that's kind of a fair point, really. We didn't really see human creativity, human intelligence as being the problem that needed to be solved. That was the washing up. So why are we suddenly wanting AI, artificial intelligence, to do all this stuff for us? Wasn't this the stuff that technology was supposed to be freeing us to be able to do? Now, just to kind of focus in on this comment a little bit, we've for years we've had trouser pressers and washing machines and dishwashers. We've had machines to do the laundry and dishes, and those white goods are constantly being developed. If you watch those series with Hannah Fry dismantling equipment and then going to the factories and finding out all the new things, you'll have a sense of this. You have a sense of the fact that our technology is constantly improving. But at the same time, the kind of mechanical white goods that are in our households are not really very fashionable in terms of big tech. It's all about the digital now. It's all about the zeros and ones. It's not about cogs and whirling things. And actually that we see that to some extent with how these things can be advertised. Our washing machines now boast AI, boast intelligent washing. It will be able to set all the programs for you, and it'll use the right temperatures, all through some sort of artificial intelligence that it claims it has got. But we've still got to load them ourselves, don't we? Still got to go and sort the washing and put it in the washing machine. And I'm not entirely sure I can trust the AI it boasts to have to be able to separate out that one red sock. It feels like maybe there is a bit of a process here that we're still having to do that's been missed, a whole step that's been missed. The robot that actually does all of the boring bits. We've solved the problem of the doing the washing part. That was laborious, but we've not solved the sorting the laundry and loading the washing machine. We've not solved the ironing to a large extent. There are gaps in this process, and it feels like maybe they're still having to do a lot of the drudgery here, and the AI is getting to have all of the fun.
Yeah, the AI has not done any laundry, has it? So we've kind of seen that tech needs people then. We've sort of seen, we can see that from what Steph's saying. Like, we've got technological solutions, but we still need people to do things with them. But I think we also have to understand that technology is people. Technology requires people to exist. You know, we've invented it. I just was talking about that, but also to do many things. Underneath technology is a lot of humans doing things. And it might help us to understand that technology might not be solving all the problems we think it is because people are doing a lot of the stuff as well. I don't mean like people, as in this picture, wearing a computer on their head and pretending to be the computer, although that is the origins of this kind of thing. So in the sort of 18th and 19th century, there was something called the Mechanical Turk, which was a automation chess player. So it was apparently a robot that played chess against real humans. And everyone thought it was amazing. It was very good at chess against real humans. And then it was destroyed in a fire. And after that, they discovered, it was revealed that it wasn't a robot at all. It was a person hidden inside the box underneath choosing the chess moves. So it wasn't so much of a special bit of technology, but just a person who was good at squishing in a small space, presumably, and controlling some chess pieces. And this sort of hoax it's used even today in the name of Amazon's platform, MTurk, that is for getting humans to do the little jobs that will make your technology work. They have a whole platform for that. A little bit dystopian, I would say. But this is this idea that behind technology is a lot of humans doing a lot of work to get there. And it's not just the people doing the high-paid jobs inventing the technology or writing the software. There's also lots of other roles that must be done by humans. For example, the role of tagging up all of the data sets like images and text and also videos, all sorts of things. The tagging up what's in them for generative AI to learn their features and be able to work. So behind generative AI, behind these large language models that Susan and Steph have sort of referred to in different ways, we have people tagging up, often for very little money, tagging up the features of this stuff or structuring the data in ways it can understand to make sure the computer can learn what we want it to know. Make sure it knows what's a person and what's a wall and what's a computer so that it could try and generate those things itself. There are people who do content moderation on social media platforms. People who, once the robots have had a go at moderating the content, all the thorny ones go to real people who have to have a look and say, like, is that against the terms of service of this site? And interpret that in their own way. And this needs people. This work needs people because people need to be the oversight or the knowledge that AI can use. But there's also the importance of things like the categories themselves. We can't just get AI to invent the categories because categories mean things to different people. They might mean things in different contexts. They might bring with them historical biases that we don't want. So we need to think about the importance of human knowledge in any of this work where we're using data, where we're using categories of things. It's really important. There are lots of examples where local context on the internet is really important, whether it's when you've seen an American start saying something is always true and everyone else is going, no, that's only in America. It's not the whole world, you know. Like maybe the date looks wrong and they're like, that's not how you write the date. And everyone's going, oh, no, it is everywhere else. But there's also lots of examples where tech companies needed sort of local moderators or local knowledge to help navigate thornier issues. I won't go into them here, but Facebook have had a number of them you can go away and look at if you're interested. And other tech companies probably have as well. So if we want technology to suit our needs and to be a supportive thing, humans have to be involved too. It's not just a technological thing. It isn't just technology solving the problem, it's humans too, whether they're thinking of the ideas or they're facilitating it actually happening. And that means that the convenience we are maybe used to in modern day life, various kinds of conveniences based on technology, require people to be part of that. We're not just using the technology for this convenience.
Sorry, there was just an announcement within our library building, which is why there was a slight pause before I on. So the so we've gone through various points in our talk of how technology is there, and Siobhan was just talking about how the people behind the technology. Um, but the point of our talk was, can we create a better technological future? And I want us to start moving on to think about that. And before we can do that, I think we have to think about reflect on some of the things that we've covered so far and what that technological future we're living in now and what that means. So I'm leaving the land of fairy tales now. And I've got a quote, I'm in the 1980s, and I've got a quote here from Madonna, Material Girl, because I think in terms of a lot of the technologies that we've got have enabled this age of convenience, which is somewhat motivated by maybe consumption as well and capitalism there. So for a lot of us, we're in a privileged state where we get access to all these technologies, and pretty much anything is a click away for us, you know, in terms of us being able to order things, in terms of us being able to interact with technology. But we have to think there are those inequalities. Not everyone has that same level of access, or actually, in terms of when we ask for that level of access, it may not all be just seamless and the technology that's delivering that. There may be human effort that is required in that. But I just want to focus a little bit in this age of convenience that we're living in. So that buy it now buttons. So some of the things that this is really helpful to us. I do think it is a positive of technology that actually being able to use these digital tools, which they are digital tools, productivity tools, we are able to access further information, maybe automate tasks that we do in the work environment, or maybe access those various different streaming information and various goods and services. So, let's have a look at things like Amazon, for example. One of their business models has been to that encourage purchasing items before we even needed them. If we subscribe, we already get a refill. We already get our toilet roll sent to us. Whether we needed that much toilet roll that month, we'll still get it because we said we'd click on a subscribe and save model. And then we've got other things as well, in terms of we've got access to a range maybe of streaming platforms. Some of them might be free for us in the UK, something like BBC iPlayer, which we can access with our general TV license. Some might be paid for, like Disney Plus, but we can basically see whatever we want. We can stream and we'll get recommendations, and we don't really need to sleep anymore because we can just keep watching all these different films and movies that we want to. And now with things like Deliveroo and DoorDash, we can get our food from our favourite restaurants just delivered to our door. We don't need to leave. That we've got that technology. So we've got all these things that have created a massive amount of convenience for us if we're the privileged users of these technologies. But with this, I said at the beginning, I've got that little bit of an itch, my library critical skills angle going, oh, all magic comes at a price. And then I said, all technology has a cost. So I think actually, if we're thinking about how we can create a better technological future, we do need to think about the impact of what we consume, in terms of our digital consumption. So if we are thinking about that delivery, we need to think about how an algorithm has become someone's boss. So they've had to deliver that, but it was a human who had to get on a bike and cycle across town and maybe do two deliveries at other ends of town because the algorithm said that it was good to pick up the item and didn't really factor in the fact that they were going to be on a bike and it was raining and it's Aberdeen and it's always raining. So maybe I should think about that before I order, from one of my favourite restaurants to be delivered at home. Maybe I should have gone out, maybe I should have done that walk and got on my bike, or got on a bus and gone that way. So I think one of the things that I'm trying to get across here is I think we need to think about sort of changing some of that narrative about convenience and saying, well, we have to think about the cost of convenience. Maybe I've focused on the human cost of maybe someone delivering that to you, maybe an Amazon worker in a warehouse who's got to move that, pack that box, get that to you so that you've got it so that you can wear it Glastonbury. I know that's what I've got on my in my basket on Amazon at the moment. But I do need to think about those things and think, well, actually, do I need to consume that? Do I need to order that? Maybe there's some things that I can trade off that convenience because I want to prioritize sustainability. I want to prioritize human rights. Maybe I'm just happy to have a little bit less. Maybe I do need a bit more sleep. So what I think when I'm thinking about that, can we create a better technological future? What I'm thinking about are maybe some of those small changes that I can make but may help to contribute to a bigger impact. So I'd like to leave you with what small change might you make? And I'll hand over to Steph.
Yeah. No, we can all make a difference. We can all make a change. And consumers certainly have purchasing power, and I think our opinions do count for something. But AI again, to go back to AI because it's the cool one on the block at the moment. Maybe it's just a flash in the pan tech bubble. But it could genuinely be a new technological revolution. It could be like the industrial revolution or the electronic revolution that I opened uh, earlier this evening with. And so it could genuinely change all of our lives in immense ways. Some of those ways positive, some of them negative. So how do we keep control of the engine that's rolling down the tracks? How do we make sure it goes where we want it to go and takes the right junctions? How do we make sure it does what we want it to do? Now, we could rely on self-regulation and just trust that the people, the technologists, the inventors, the developers, the programmers know what they're doing. We've seen how tech companies might start out with bold ethical notions about not being evil, but we've also seen how that slipped. Everyone wants to be the first with the new shiny thing, and when the bottom line's profit, we've seen from the past that ethical considerations can very easily fall by the wayside. So maybe we can trust them, but we probably can't. Therefore, what other things can we turn to? I mean, legislation. Legislation seems like a sensible thing to look at. But one of the things we saw at the start when I was talking about technology, about the fact that it transcends boundaries, it crosses borders. So legislation is usually something that happens at a national level or a local level. We've seen that countries can legislate against technologies that are global. We see that with when countries block access to certain websites. But we also have technologies like VPNs that let us go around the edge and pretend we're in a different country. So there are limits to that power. Also, I suppose this is where having like a bigger scale options for legislation comes in quite handy. Or if you're just like a major market, you've got you've got a bit of heft, a bit of economic heft to bring to bear. A large country can have a lot of sway if it's a very kind of technology heavy user. If it's just a big customer. The EU is a kind of uh, group of countries that can exercise power. We've seen that with having control of the browser that you have within your operating system and being presented with a choice of browsers. We've seen that with all the kind of cookie requests to things that we have when we go to a website, which, okay, they're quite annoying, but they're also there for a reason to protect us and to inform us about uh, what we're putting onto our computer when we visit certain websites. So that there are cases where legislation at a large scale has had an effect. So definitely legislation is an option here. I mean there is a trade-off between legislation and innovation. If we are innovating, if we are creating new ways of being, then you know we kind of we're kind of challenging an orthodoxy, and so legislation and innovation have to keep up with each other. They have to not get trapped in and sort of locked in a kind of stagnation. Tech revolutions are breaking an orthodoxy. They are by definition challenging the status quo. But I think there's another aspect to this that kind of plays into it, and we kind of need to think about a little bit because technology historically has, for the most part, and this is a sweeping crass generalization, but we've got used to technology being pretty well tested before it goes to market. You know, does my washing machine explode if I put purple underpants in it? Nobody wants to be liable for that sort of thing. So you test it and you make sure that it doesn't explode if you put purple underpants in it. So we've kind of got used to the idea of technologies reaching us having some level of standards. We have, and again, this comes back to legislation. We have standards for products, you know, British standards and EU standards and things like that that we're familiar with for saying, look, this has gone through appropriate levels of testing. This is sufficiently safe as a product. And I think there's a sense that a lot of the digital technologies that we encounter haven't been tested in this way. They haven't had that same rigorous testing. You know, we heard the Facebook motto of old of move fast and break things, and they did break things, and that ethos can break huge things. You know, with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, you know, with the impact of targeted advertising on Facebook and how that, you know, changed elections back in 2016. That is an impact of technology on society that maybe, you know, maybe that was a situation where we were the guinea pigs. We were the ones that were doing the testing rather than, you know, those crash test dummies that you put in cars. And maybe we're the crash test dummy. Now, you know, we're participating, I suppose, in like huge social experiments potentially here. But you know, I said maybe this isn't as straightforward as I'm making it out. Who were the testers for the internet in every home or smartphones in our pockets? And yet, you know, maybe there's a net positive with those things. You know, all progress is a gamble, be that social or technological. You know, we've got to take a chance on things. And it might pay off or it might blow up in our face, like a washing machine where we put the purple underpants in. You know, we've got to kind of chance it a little bit. But who were the testers for us moving into cities to supervise the operation of like industrial scale looms or furnaces and things? And the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it's not the first time we found ourselves being fed to the machines. And I'm feeling a bit, you know, ground down by some of the arguments in today's session. I started off quite positive about technology, but maybe like with the Industrial Revolution, maybe now and again we probably, you know, maybe we need to put a spanner in the works, you know, embrace our inner Luddite and fight back against our new robot overlords. Don't know, maybe.
But I think that what we kind of want to say, though, is that regardless of Steph's slight digression there into the world of the Luddites, I think she's soon going to smash the computer and no longer be presenting this talk. But we're not actually saying that we need to go backwards. I'm hoping that you can guess that from the fact we've tried to be relatively balanced in terms of our interest in technology and its positives and negatives. We all actually do a lot around technology, even if we are also quite critical of it. This is not about saying that we need to go backwards at all. In fact, we don't want to say that you shouldn't use technology or about returning to some kind of past that didn't have technology. When exactly are you setting the time machine for? It's going to be a difficult trade-off between like no digital technology but good medicine. So we'll see where that's going. And also a lot of medicine involves digital technology these days. Oh, it's complicated, isn't it? But we're not trying to say that we want to go backwards. What we're trying to argue for is that we need to engage with this conversation and try and have a voice where we can. So we can all have a voice in some way. I think both Susan and Steph have kind of referred to this belief that whether it's through in getting involved in arguing around legislation that might happen, whether it's around using our kind of consumer power in terms of what we are going to use or not, just choosing whether or not you use a particular site, whether you use a generative AI platform, whether you use a social media site, that choice is in itself representative. It's having a voice in terms of what people want to see, what people want to use. We personally can be responsible for our use of technology, and we personally can keep informed about technology as we can, like coming to this talk or reading the news headlines when they, as they often do, mention things like AI or tech companies these days, because that helps us to be part of that conversation. And we can also encourage other people to be part of that conversation too, so people don't just shut off. I know that all three of us, we want people to, for example, talk more about generative AI so that people feel comfortable, whether or not they are, really love using it, really hate it, think it's terrible, or are somewhere in the middle. People need to have those conversations. If you say, oh, don't talk about it because it's bad, or don't talk about it because I really like it and I don't want anyone to say anything bad about it, we're not having a critical conversation about technology. So I think a better technological future is where we can all engage with the conversation and use technologies responsibly, but also use them for some of that convenience, because that has been why they've been invented. And to return to Morozov to finish off our talk then, at the end of his book, To Save Everything Click Here, he sort of accepts that there will be some technological solutionism that's going to happen. We can't just get rid of all of it and people will stop thinking that you can use technology to solve all the problems. And he also really emphasizes that technology is not meant to be the enemy either, despite the book kind of arguing around some of the problems of using technology to solve things. But what he says is, once we can't reject technology outright, we'll need to explain why some fixes are better than others. If it makes us think and ask questions, it is a worthy enterprise all by itself. So if we accept that we need to talk about technology, we also need to discuss why some applications of technology are better than others. We've tried to talk about some applications today. I'm sure you can think of different examples where they're good or bad or indifferent or not very effective. So if we can use our sort of critical thought, we can think and ask questions about what technology is doing, who owns it, why they've chosen it to do that thing, and question about whether or not it's helping us actually solve the problem. That is, as Morozov says, a worthy enterprise. And that's kind of the way of getting a better technological future. If our talk is a yes-no question, as it is, can we create a better technological future? I think we're arguing that yes, we can. But to do so, we need to have this sort of critical lens, and we need to think about what problems technology is solving, if it's the right ones, and find ways in which we can influence which problems it solves as well.